Hello nerds, and today we're going to be talking about... It's Joshua, everyone's favorite, right? Oh boy, Joshua. So, let's take a second. We're going to talk about him in the most extreme way we possibly can, by being as annoying as possible. So, first, I'm just going to pull up his stats, and there are some things that we do need to make note of, okay? So as you can see, his stats are now in the lower left, and you can see that, all in all, there's some interesting bits here. So, first off, these stats, of course, since he's a Tempest Trial character, means that he will never have a variation. These are all his stats that he has right now as that unit at level 40 with 5 stars. And, of course, 31 attack is not the best, but hey, 35 speed, 30 defense, and 28 resistance is a very interesting prospect. But one thing you need to note about Joshua is that, well, right now, he is one infantry unit that I never thought I would say this about him. He is the one infantry unit that has the highest BST. Base stat total comes in at 164. And that's not even including the special effect that comes from his weapon, which we'll get into in a bit. But that is outrageous. But there is something to note here, okay? BST does not mean too much when the allocation of the points is something that's odd. We've had this before. Some units have some better BST, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they equate to great dominance in the game if they are instead push towards a different threshold. Say, instead of, putting in an attack, it's, that BST went somewhere else, like defense or resistance. Well, that's cool, but not the best. And Joshua is kind of an example of that. But not a bad example, okay? Just so you know, he may have 164 BST, but his attack is 31. That doesn't mean he's bad. He's a decent unit, an all-around unit that actually, I shouldn't say decent, a very good unit. He does not have allocations in certain points that you may want, and he doesn't have a standout stat. But what he does have is quite phenomenal in the fact that he has, well, with his weapon, he actually has all stats above 30, which is interesting. And gonna be something we need to look into to get a better idea of it, okay? All in all, Joshua, well, he's a really crazy all-arounder. You know how they say it, right? Jack of all trades. But then, of course, there's also the Master of None. And I don't think the Master of None portion really affects him too much. But let's just talk about a few things, okay? So his weapon that he comes with is called Aldholma. And Aldholma is, well, basically, if you are familiar with Minerva or Miklas's weapon, it's essentially that, but also has a res of +5 on the weapon at base value. So that means that his 28 res is actually more 33. So you can already kind of tell that Joshua is going to be tanking things, at least in some ways, some forms, and somehow. I mean, I don't really know if there's a lot of green units that you're going to be going up against when it comes to tomes, but hey, he can tank them, at least reliably well. Also, of course, the accelerated special trigger cooldown, and since it's a legendary weapon, it of course has a might of 16, which means that at least he's, his attack is going to be buffed up quite a bit, hitting at least 47. So, it's nothing to sneeze at, it's not exactly the most amazing, but it does buff him in ways that might be pretty pivotal for a character. So, when it comes down to this, at base value, with all of these things on the table, what does this mean for our friend Joshua? Well, it means a few things. One, he will be able to tank things reliably well. Two, he has a decent base kit, we'll get into that in a second. And three, well, he may not excel at many things, he may not be able to instantly kill like some units. He will be a very heavy tanking kind of unit for your team if you decide to bring him along. Unfortunately, some other sword units may have the advantage with some of their abilities, but if you decide to use Joshua, you probably won't go wrong. just so you know. So, alright. So let's say you want to build him. What would be the suggested abilities? Well, first off, I'm just going to say command skills. Really, there's not very many to choose from. You can easily, just go with reposition. If you're using something else, and, maybe you put Joshua in Tempest Trials or Chain Challenge, you gave him Renewal or something. Then also Ardent Sacrifice or Reciprocal Aid, whichever you feel is better. I'm not really going to list those there. That's pretty basic stuff. Reposition is pretty much the, one ability that everyone goes for because, well, it's a simple ability, easy to get, nothing too crazy. But let's talk about his special commands, his skills that he can trigger. So, there are a few options. Of course, he already technically comes with Moonbow. Moonbow is already in his kit, and you can unlock it. And of course, with Audholma, it will activate much quicker. It's really up to you on if this is something you want. Moonbow may not be the strongest, but it will help him overcome a few things when it comes to opposition from defenses or resistance. Mostly defenses because, well, he's a physical attacker. So, that's up to you. However, in case you do not feel like doing Moonbow, you can always go with Iceberg. Iceberg will, of course, do 50% of his res, and again, will also work with Audholma in two ways. The special trigger cooldown, and of course, Iceberg's, resistance whole effect. So, just an option. Now, there are so many ways you could probably build Joshua here. That's just kind of explaining how versatile he is. He is such a strange unit that, well, you could build him in a number of ways. I mean, for A's, there's a lot of ways you could do so. First off, he starts off with close defense, which means that he's going to be more tanky to people who come up and try to just hit him in the head with their melee abilities, which, yeah, that kind of sucks for him, but at least he'll have it. So it's not a bad option for him. Granted, I can already tell that several people are going to use that just to kill him and get it. So what else would you do for him? Well, there are a few ways, and I'm going to go through them real quick, okay? First up, you could always go with the tried and true Fury. Fury's just an easy skill to get, and of course, boosting all of his stats is not something that's terrible. It helps him in some ways. Giving him +3 everything outside of HP means that he's going to be hitting fairly hard. He will be able to hit 50 attack and have a lot of speed, a bit more defense, and of course, more resistance, which is always nice. But there's also the other options that are available. Now, let's say you wanted to really go hardcore. Well, the option that you could really have here, since he has the defense and the resistance to at least sustain himself a bit more on the battlefield, making him a prime baiting unit is something that people would probably want to go for. So I'm going to go with that kind of build. As you can see, Distant Counter is a very viable option for him. It will allow him to attack anyone who attacks him, of course, and since most of the units that usually are used to try and attack someone, typically they have weak defenses, he should be able to at least mop up on them. Now, here's the thing. That does not necessarily mean that you should go Distant Defense. I mean, well, Distant Counter. Distant Defense is a whole other option. You could go with all sorts of options for him. I'm just giving you an option for what you could really go with. Joshua would work well with Distant Counter, Fury, or even Close Defense if you decide to go with it. But let's say you're going with Distant Counter, what would be a good B skill? Well, there's a lot of options. Of course, the tried and true Quick Riposte is something that everyone wants to do, since he only has 35 speed right now, and he technically can't be merged to really up it too far. There are, of course, other options. Quick Riposte will allow him to at least, hopefully, compete with, some of those units who might be able to at least get in his speed threshold, and maybe not, double, but he will with it, of course. So, that works really well with Distant Counter. If you decide to go with Fury, you could go with other options all across the table. There's other things like, for instance, just to give you an example, Wrath is also a good option. Wrath is a pretty nice ability. Just works well, since he tends to be taking some hits and you want him to be a baiting unit. Wrath might not be a bad idea. This way, when he gets low, it'll work more with Audholma, Moonbow, and really crank up the damage for him. It will really hit hard when you hit any of those abilities with that special trigger. However, if you can't do that and you don't feel like it, you can always go with things like Desperation if you're buffing his speed. There's a lot of options out there to make him great. But these two abilities work really well with any sort of build that will require that. Especially with Distant Counter, Quick Riposte will really work well. And if you want to have some fun, Wrath might be also pretty interesting. Now, let's say that you wanted to go with a C skill. Well, the easiest C skills for him are obviously something that really works well with that. Of course, I'm talking about ploy abilities, attack ploy, speed ploy. These, of course, not the easiest options to get right now, unless you want to kill a Deirdre or some other units. And maybe you gave Est one, and you were just like, screw Est. Let's go with defense ploy. Of course, these run off his already, 28 resistance, but then of course Adholma adds up more, and typically units have pretty low resistances when it comes to those beefier targets. So having something like defense ploy or even speed ploy, in case you feel like having a little bit of a mixture, is always a good option for him. And without that, well, you can always go with any sort of hones, but typically Joshua will probably want to be the one who's being buffed, and this way he can reply in kind to anyone who tries to, come close to him, or anyone who's within the cardinal directions. So, obviously ploys are a good option. The only thing you need to really note about Joshua is that while he's a jack of all trades, he still has to overcome the Master of None. Meaning that, unfortunately, he's going to be competing for a slot with a lot of other really powerful red sword units, not only units like Ryoma or, the more recent Mia, Ira, those characters. It's going to be something that's going to be pretty difficult for him if you decide to work him in there. But I feel that if you I said doo-doo, if you do decide to work him in there, he will he'll be pretty substantial as a unit for you to use. He's like a rock in some ways, and I believe technically he's kind of like Carl, but he's been power crept a bit, as Jay once told me. They kind of share the same sort of weird stat alignments, but of course Joshua has the highest BST here, so naturally his stat alignment is a lot more interesting. And of course, add in Adholma, he's going to go a lot of places. You can, of course, do all sorts of things. Again, he's very, very flexible in how he works due to his stat alignment. You could, put life and death on him, go desperation crazy, things like that. It's really up to you, but I just decided to go with those builds that I can give you. But, you don't really have to do too much if you really wanted to go with it. Close defense works really well. Fury works really well. All this fun stuff. It's really up to you. And if you happen to have the resources to do so and make him as great as you possibly can, I see no problem with it. Joshua is going to be a fun character to see in the game, and I hope you guys all have fun with him. He has the highest BST of any infantry unit in the game right now. And that says, this is going to be an interesting last few days. So, next few days, not last few days. I'm not dying. Anyways, next few days. But, so, let's just call it a day with that and get back to what we needed to, work on. We have Book 2 coming up soon, guys. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least a little bit, full of information, not fun stuff. Yeah, I don't know what you want to think, but if you did enjoy this video, feel free to leave a like. And if you found it all that informational, is that really a word? Feel free to, subscribe and hang out with us. We do all sorts of stuff here on this channel. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for being awesome as always. Joshua is interesting and is going to be a fun Tempest trial. So, catch you all later. Thanks for watching. Bye now.